Greetings, my National Bar Association family. My name is Bert Jennings, and I am your current NBA Secretary. It has been a privilege to have been appointed by President Calhoun to fill in as Secretary for the 2023-2024 year. I am currently seeking nomination for the second year of the two-year term and would appreciate your support. During the year, the Calhoun administration has been quite successful in accomplishing its mission of empowering through advocacy and service, and has, in fact, brought us great programming in this quest. As your secretary, I am proud to have aided in this success through my service and my talents, and through using my contacts and resources to ensure this great programming. Such was the case at our Wiley Branton Symposium held the last weekend of October of 2023. There, for our luncheon, it was my pleasure to elicit and acquire the presence and support of Dr. Eddie S. Glaude, Jr., a childhood friend from our hometown of Moss Point, Mississippi, and a fellow graduate of Moss Point High and Morehouse College. Eddie was always a standout and is truly one of our finest. Dr. Glaude is an American academic and author. As mentioned, he is a graduate of Morehouse College, where he received his BA. Temple University, where he received his master's in African American Studies, and Princeton, where he received a PhD in religion. He is the James S. McDonald Distinguished University Professor of African American Studies at Princeton, where he is also the past chair of the Department of African American Studies. He has made many television appearances, including on C-SPAN, CNN, and MSNBC. He is also a New York Times best-selling author. Please see the link to his vitae espousing his many accomplishments. The Calhoun administration was repeatedly asked, why, with all of the negativity around leadership and legislation in Florida, are we hosting an event there? Well, please listen to Dr. Glaude's address as he explains to us the importance of taking the fight to the battleground, of stepping forward into the fray, of being lawyers and counselors at a time of great need. And now, Dr. Eddie S. Glaude, Jr.
To see so many of you who dedicated your lives to make a difference in this country. But these are difficult times. I don't have to tell you that. Many of you know better than I do that too many Americans are struggling to find their footing. It seems that we're all a bit off balance today. It shouldn't be surprising. Ours has been a time of death, with bodies piling up like those in an Alexander Gardner photograph. I must say, and this is not your typical American optimism, that it feels like the country is broken. Mass shootings, the bitterness of our politics, war, greed and selfishness have eroded any robust sense of the public good. Our relationships with one another have snapped like a dry twig in winter. Everything seems to be so damn transactional. We aren't quite right. And I think we must begin again. Now, what do I mean by begin again? I took the title of my book about James Baldwin from his last novel, Just Above My Head. And here the central character tries to make sense of the aftermath of the Black freedom struggle, of the Black freedom struggle of the mid-20th century, and the responsibility of those who must live in its wake. What might it mean to take up this work now, again, in a moment when it seems that white folks have lost their damn mind? Amen. And some black folk have sold their soul for a mess of porridge. But begin again also registers something else. Baldwin refers to the second chapter of Revelation, verse 5. Consider how far you have fallen. Repent and do the things you did at first. If you do not repent, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, end quote. In the mode of the poet-prophet, Baldwin called the nation to confront the lie of its own self-understanding and to get about the work of building a country truly based on democratic principles. He put it this way, quote, "To do your first works over means to re-examine everything. Go back to where you started or as far back as you can. Examine it all. Travel your road again and tell the truth about it. Sing or shout or testify or keep it to yourself, but know whence she came," end quote. Most Americans desperately avoid doing such a thing. We'd rather live comfortably in the luxury of our myths and fables. We refuse to confront what Baldwin called the price of the ticket to be here in the United States, where people left behind the particulars of Europe and became white. That transformation, Baldwin said, has choked many of a human being to death in this country. Because to become white meant the subjugation of others. It was an act that disfigured the soul by closing off the ability to see oneself in others and to see others in you. Our task remains to understand that history, the history of how the disfiguring of the soul happened, and to free oneself in the country from the insidious hold this view has on us in order to become a different kind of creation. This will involve confronting the history that shaped and shapes who we are. And that's hard to do in this history-dodging country where so many are content with self-deception. Y'all didn't know who you really invited up here, did you?
That's right.
Think about what people are saying with regards to the teaching of the facts of our history. So-called critique of critical race theory, to programs focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What's happening right here in the state of Florida?
Whoa. Yes.
In places like Virginia and Tennessee and in South Carolina, as groups like Moms for America, funded by big conservative donors, attack school boards and superintendents for daring to teach the country's history.
Yes.
We know that people aren't teaching critical theory, race theory to kindergartens. Y'all took that in law school, for God's sake. And the point is, and it has always been, to avoid any story that doesn't confirm our national goodness. We don't want to know what history says about us. We don't want to admit what history reveals about us. Ours is a moment in which many are running away from it all, right? For people, as has been the case for those who are committed to life as it is, where people think about history in simple terms. A national poll sponsored by the American Historical Association and Farley Dickinson University revealed that 2/3 of Americans think of history as simply an assemblage of dates, names, and events, a chronicle of sorts. And no wonder our debates tend to center, when we talk about history, about what is included as opposed to the kinds of interpretations of the past that orient us to the present. In that same study, quote, nearly 2/3 of those surveyed agreed that it's acceptable to teach history about the harm done to others, even if such an approach causes learners discomfort. But the divisions emerged or surfaced when people were asked whether history should question or celebrate the nation's past. Americans find comfort in myths and fables, illusions that confirm the inherent goodness of this grand experiment. Safety is found in stories that tell us that America is an example of democracy achieved, that ours is the shining city on the hill. But as Jimmy wrote in The Fire Next Time, these stories would have us believe that, quote, our ancestors were all freedom-loving heroes, that they were born in the greatest country the world has ever seen, or that Americans are invincible in battle and wise in peace, that Americans have always dealt honorably with Mexicans and Indians and all other neighbors are inferiors, that American men are the world's most direct and virile. You believe that? I got an affordable flat in Brooklyn to sell. But there's a different story, a darker story. A darker reality that haunts this country, that is one drenched in blood and in tears. Rosamond and his brother, and lift every voice and sing, tried to capture it, right? Unimaginable horror resides here. trauma passed on from generation to generation, and it is soaked in the soil of this country, especially in the South, especially in places like Florida, where the landscape is often filled with monuments to that violence, bridges where strange fruit dangled, places in the center of town that bear the markings of human sacrifice. Imagine how many felt the day after lynching. I'm not referring to those who actually participated in the celebrations surrounding the cruel act of barbarity, but I'm talking about those who were supposed to learn the lesson. Those darker souls who lived here, the fear for their loved ones, the silence around what just happened, the trauma that would then guide how one reared one's children, walked the roads of this place, how one even dreamed. The intimacy of hatred and how it would take root in our spirits and our souls. History matters. Y'all all right? Yeah. History matters because we carry it within us. And as Baldwin wrote, it is in great pain and terror that one begins to assess the history which has placed one where one is and formed one's point of view, because one enters into battle with that historical creation oneself. This involves confronting the ghosts that haunt our current days. I'm from the water. And when people don't die right, they don't stay in the ground.
Yes.
They haunt.
Yes. Yes.
It is difficult. It is difficult for some to imagine the consequences of America's violence and the lives crushed because of it. Now how the trauma shaped and shapes our lives now, but we now see the cost. We see the cost of forgetting. As generation after generation must face the consequences of a country that refuses to grow up, a country that refuses to believe that it is more than a white nation in the vein of old Europe. We are living today amid the fever dreams. I didn't come here to just make a buck.
Come on now.
We're living today in the midst of fever dreams, assaults on voting rights, mainstreaming of white supremacist ideology, doubling down on forms of policing that have put so many of our people in the ground. Every day we see and hear the loud voices of those clamoring for the good old days where people like you and me would know our place. Howard Thurman was right. I got to watch my time. Howard Thurman was right. The great theologian. He said that we must understand that segregation was a mood,
Yes.
a state of mind, and that the law could only take us so far. I know I'm in a room full of lawyers, but he said that the law could only take us so far in remedying the evil of the system. The law, Thurman wrote, quote, cannot deal with the human spirit directly.
That's right.
Preach,
That's right.
Eddie.
And here is the insight. If there is no fundamental transformation of the person, if there's no fundamental transformation of the society, then those who bear the brunt of society's contradictions will find themselves over and over again navigating and negotiating fever dreams.
Yes, yes.
Confronting and dealing with what can only be called an American madness.
Yes.
Wash, rinse, and repeat.
Yes.
And in the middle of it all, we have to raise our babies
Yes.
and ensure that they have a future. In those moments in the past when we've had a chance in this country to imagine America anew, we have witnessed the reassertion of the idea that this is a white nation in the vein of old Europe and the lie that provides its cover. Think about the Civil War and radical Reconstruction, what historians refer to as the second founding. There we see the founding of the modern U.S. nation state, the passage of the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They've been attacking the 14th Amendment since it was ratified.
Yes.
Say that.
What did we get in response? We got Jim Crow in the South, a legal regime that tried to extend our second-class citizenship. Frederick Douglass would describe these folks as the apostles of forgetfulness. DeSantis. What else did we get? We got convict leasing, another form of slavery. The ideology of Anglo-Saxonism guiding our imperial efforts across the globe. what historians, right, we see very clearly the moment in which we try to imagine America as a multiracial democracy, we double down on our ugliness. Think about the black freedom struggle of the mid-20th century. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 65. Attempts to usher a more robust form of citizenship for black folk, to imagine America not as a hair-invoked democracy. Remember, we've only been a democracy since 1965. What did we get in response? What did we get in response, preacher? Pastor, what did we get in response? We got calls for law and order. And that just wasn't Nixon.
Hello.
That just wasn't Nixon. We got the tax revolt in California, which laid the foundation for the erosion of any robust social safety net. And then we got the election, the eventual election of Ronald Reagan. And for those who were members of participants of Black Power, Ronald Reagan was as notorious as George Wallace.
Yes.
And in each moment when the nation had a chance to imagine itself otherwise, we saw the reassertion of this idea that whiteness ought to matter more to us, that it ought to define the distribution of advantage and disadvantage. We doubled down on our ugliness. I could talk about the election of Barack Obama, supposedly to turn a corner, right? And then what did we see? We saw an assault on voting rights almost immediately, the gutting, right, of the Voting Rights Act. What else did we see? We saw the Tea Party.
Yes.
Yep. And then we vomited up Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And here we are today confronting the ugliness of the governor of this state. Policies designed to undo the gains of the last 60 years, the willful ignorance about our past that provides justification for the mean-spirited effort to disenfranchise Americans and to fortify a certain vision of the country. We have to confront this ugliness that sits at the heart of this place. We have to tap the root. We have to toss aside the illusions and fantasies that protect our innocence. Baldwin wrote in 1964, quote, "What is most terrible is that American white men are not prepared to believe my version of the story." To believe that it happened in order to avoid believing that they have set up in themselves a fantastic system of evasions and denials and justifications, which is about to destroy their grasp of reality, which is another way of saying, Baldwin wrote, their moral sense. He went on to say, what I'm trying to say is that the crime is not the most important thing here. What makes our situation serious is that we have spent so many generations pretending that the crime did not happen. This is not to deny the fact of substantive change. The people in this room, you, are evidence of the significant shifts in our society. My mama cleaned toilets at Ingalls Shipyard.
That's it.
Had her first baby when she was 15. Now her baby's walking around in Brooks Brothers suits. And I'm not trying to deny the significance. We've all achieved some modicum of success, right? Many of you walk the corridors of power. Your dreams have come true. But what are we to make of that success and power as the fever dream spikes today? What would it mean for you and me to collaborate with the world as it is? Where our success and presence in high places offer cover for the status quo. Where you and I tinker around the edges as the fever dream takes hold. And remember, the fever dream is the bundle of lies and fantasies corded together like snakes that justify the slaughter. I believe the aim of the grand tradition of the black freedom struggle that I come out of wasn't simply to make room for my feet under white folks' table. But to fundamentally reorganize who and what is valued in this country. Remember, diversifying evil doesn't change the meaning of the noun.
Amen.
Yeah, we already
I wish more of your colleagues were in this room. What might it mean to take up this work now again in a moment when it seems that so many folk have lost their minds and so many of us have sold their souls for a mess of pie? In this moment with so much at stake, those of you in positions of leadership throughout this country must make a choice. Will you join the house of Pharaoh, or will you stand in that prophetic tradition that dares to speak truth to power and act on behalf of the least of these? Remember, folk who don't die right don't stay in the ground. Our history haunts. The terrors still have us by the throat. And the question remains, what will you do now in this moment of storm and stress? You should marshal all of your strengths, your connections, and you must challenge this present regime in the courts.
Yes.
And the state of Florida should be ground zero. At every turn, we should be challenging the dismantling of affirmative action. Let's meet Ed Bloom on the battlefield.
Yes.
Not wait till he litigates,
That's right.
but get him now.
That's right.
Challenge DeSantis.
Yes.
Be imaginative with regards to the law. And don't simply be reactive, waiting for them to do something, and then we react in order to secure the gains that are now threatened.
That's right.
Identify the arenas that require bold and decisive action, and garner your intellectual and financial resources to mount a challenge to make this country what it can be. This is especially the case in the arena of education.
All right.
They're trying to fundamentally destroy our access, our ability to access these places. I'm a Morehouse man. I want all of you to come back to HBCUs, but they're trying not only to deny us access to the places like Princeton and Amherst and Harvard, but even if you get in, they want to make it miserable by dismantling diversity at the offices. They're trying to take us back. And I'm reminded of Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and Wiley. I'm reminded when they were conceiving of the strategy to challenge Jim Crow. They weren't just reacting. What are you doing? What are we doing in this moment? I'm going to come home now. I'm not trying to tell you, no, I can't take my time because we got to eat.
You're getting fed now, brother.
I'm not
You're getting fed now.
I'm not trying to tell you what kind of politics you must have. I'm only insisting that you get clear on who you are and what you are committed to doing about this world of ours. The headwinds of the storms are howling.
Yes.
What choice will you make? I come out of a grand tradition. Hard-working folk on the coast of Mississippi who loved me hard and left some bruises.
Yes.
But they insisted that I see myself in the full light of others and find purpose rooted in love, which would then serve as my guiding light. Freedom is more than being left alone or being able to do what you want to do or buy nice, fancy things. Freedom is more than putting your feet under certain folks' table. Freedom is found in a purposeful, driven life. Trying to make good on the promise that made each of us possible.
Yes.
You know, Jimmy was brokenhearted when he died.
Yes.
President Calhoun, he was brokenhearted. He saw what the country had become. In his last interview with Quincy Troop in November of 1987, he said, and he would be dead the following month, he said, I was right. I was right about what was happening in the country, what was about to happen to all of us, really, one way or another, and the choices people would have to make, and watching people make them and denying them at the same time. I don't care who says what. I watched it happen, and all of this because they want to be white. Whoa. Because it's the only way to justify the slaughter. Madness abounds. Today we find ourselves, and there's no reasonable way to deny this, in a moment of crisis. The country is changing, and the substance of that transformation is not clear. Americans are divided, and those divisions go well beyond ideological differences. They cut to the marrow of the bone. Too often we see each other as enemies. Disagreement is saturated with contempt. Mutuality drowns in the bitterness of our public discourse, and the sense of common purpose and public good has been thrown into the trash bin as we huddle in our silos. Race shadows it all.
Yes, it does.
The great replacement theory. Panic and terror around demographic shifts, assaults on voting rights and affirmative action, bitter debates about American history. We find ourselves living among men and women, once again mad with the fever of a distorted view of liberty, willing to throw away this entire experiment in democracy as they cling to their fantasies. Hubris clogs the nation's throat. The answer to the troubles in this country, as it has always been, rests with the willingness of everyday people to fight for democracy, not to outsource that struggle to so-called prophets and heroes, but to realize that the salvation of democracy itself requires, quote, the creation of personal attitudes and individuals that affirm the dignity and standing of all people. We must be the kinds of people democracies require. Jimmy put it this way in Search for Majority. I'm coming to a close, I promise. He says, and he's talking about salvation here. To be with God is really to be involved with something enormous. Some enormous, overwhelming desire and joy and power which you cannot control, which controls you. And he says, I conceive of my life as a journey towards something I do not understand, which in the going toward makes me better. It is in the going towards that salvation can be found.
Yes, yes.
The imaginative leap which allows us to see beyond ourselves and to reach for another, to be vulnerable, to tend and to love, to rip off the mask that blinds us to the beauty of the human being right in front of us, to recognize the distorting and disfiguring effect of hatred and fear and the exacting power of love, no matter how vague the invocation of love may be. It remains the one force that transcends the differences that get in the way of our genuinely living together. In one of his last essays, To Crush a Serpent, Baldwin recounts his journey with and through religion, and along the way casts aside the hypocrisy of the white evangelical organizations like the Moral Majority. This is what he said. He said about the hatreds and the fears. The flames of such fears and the scapegoats that must bear the brunt of the hate are meant to exercise the terrors of the mob. Those ladders to fire, he said. Those ladders to fire, the burning of the witch, the heretic, the Jew, the N-word, the F-word, have always failed to redeem or even to change in any way whatever the mob. They merely force their connection on the only plane on which the mob can meet. The charred bones connects its members and give them reason to speak to one another. For the charred bones are the sum total of their individual self-hatred externalized. The burning or lynching or torturing gives them something to talk about. They dare no other subject, certainly not the forbidden subject of the blood-stained self. They dare not trust one another. It's not about us. It's never been about me. It's never been about you. It's about what they fail to see in themselves. Salvation is not found in such tricky magic. Salvation, Baldwin says, is not a flight from the wrath of God, it's accepting and reciprocating the love of God. Salvation is not separation, and it seems with all that I'm saying that I'm thinking we should be separated. No, I'm trying to clear the way for a different way of being together, trying to claim that we have to be different kinds of human beings, saying that we have to fight for the world that we want, just as they're fighting for the world that they want.
Yes.
That's right.
Salvation is not separation. It is the beginning of the union with all that is or has been or will be, Baldwin wrote. It is found in the going towards, and love is its carriage. The world remains cruel. And the United States is especially maddening as it now sanctions such brutality around the globe.
Yes.
But the words of the late Toni Morrison seem more resonant than ever. She said this: of course there's cruelty. Cruelty is a mystery. But if we see the world as one long, brutal game, then we bump into another mystery. And that is the mystery of beauty, of light, the canary that sings on the skull. Unless all ages and all races of men have been deluded, there seems to be such a thing as grace. Such a thing as beauty, and such a thing as harmony, all wholly free and available to us, end quote. All National Bar Association members, stand in that beauty. Extend that grace, and go out and change this world. You have been called.
Amen. Amen.
How will you answer? We come out of a grand tradition. Will you live up to its ethical demand, or will you take the bribe? If you live up to its ethical demand and tell the truth, fight for what is just, and help us build a new America for the babies yet born. Thank you so much.
Amen.